What if the events we're witnessing today aren't simply random occurrences, but precisely timed steps in a divine timeline established millennia ago? What if the apparent acceleration of global crises, technological developments, and geopolitical realignments is signaling not just another historical transition, but the approaching culmination of human history itself? The convergence of biblical signs has reached a frequency and intensity that even secular observers find difficult to dismiss, and the implications could transform how we understand our moment in history. When prophetic whispers become headlines, wisdom recognizes what coincidence cannot explain. Unknown. Throughout human history, people have speculated about the timing of prophesied end-times events. Each generation has looked at its challenges and wondered, is this the time? Wars, disasters, moral decline, and societal upheaval have prompted such questions across centuries. Yet Christians have generally acknowledged that while these conditions might reflect the biblical description of the end times in general terms, specific alignment with detailed prophetic requirements remained incomplete. What makes our current moment uniquely significant is the unprecedented convergence of specific prophetic preconditions that previous generations could only partially imagine. For the first time in human history, we are witnessing the simultaneous fulfillment of detailed biblical prerequisites across multiple prophetic domains: geopolitical, technological, environmental, and spiritual, creating a prophetic alignment unprecedented in its comprehensiveness and precision. Perhaps the most significant prophetic development involves Israel's restoration as a nation. For nearly 2 millennia, the Jewish people remained dispersed worldwide with no homeland, a condition that appeared permanent and irreversible to many observers. Yet Scripture repeatedly prophesied a final regathering of the Jewish people to their ancient homeland. Isaiah 11:11-12 described how God would reclaim the surviving remnant of his people and gather the exiles of Israel from the 4 quarters of the earth. Ezekiel 37 provided the famous vision of dry bones coming together, explicitly interpreted as representing Israel's national resurrection. This prophesied restoration seemed impossible for most of history. Yet in 1948, Israel was re-established as a nation through extraordinary historical circumstances. This development alone represents remarkable prophetic fulfillment, but subsequent events have further aligned with biblical details. The 1967 Six-Day War returned Jerusalem to Jewish control for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, fulfilling Jesus' prophecy that Jerusalem would be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Luke 21:24. The significance of Israel's restoration cannot be overstated from a prophetic perspective. Jesus himself established Israel as the prophetic timepiece when he gave the fig tree analogy in Matthew 24:32-34. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. The fig tree frequently symbolized Israel in Scripture, making this passage a potential reference to Israel's rebirth, signaling the approaching end of the age. If generation refers to the lifespan of those who witnessed Israel's restoration, we may be approaching the outer limits of this prophetic timeframe. Beyond Israel's restoration, current geopolitical alignments show remarkable conformity to prophetic expectations. Ezekiel 38:39 describes a future invasion of Israel by a coalition led by a power from the far north, traditionally identified as Russia, and including Persia, modern Iran, along with other nations from what are now Islamic regions. For most of history, such an alliance seemed implausible, as Russia and Persia, Iran, had limited relations and often conflicting interests. Today, we witness Russia and Iran in unprecedented strategic alignment, cooperating militarily in Syria, directly on Israel's border, engaging in joint naval exercises and establishing deep economic ties despite international sanctions on both nations. This alignment creates, for the first time in history, the exact geopolitical configuration described in Ezekiel's prophecy. The recent formalization of this partnership through major defense agreements and technology transfers represents a prophetic milestone that previous generations never witnessed. The technological conditions necessary for specific end times prophecies have also reached unprecedented fulfillment potential. Revelation 13:16-17 describes a system where no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark. Throughout history, implementing such comprehensive economic control seemed logistically impossible. Today, the combination of digital currencies, biometric identification, artificial intelligence, and global connectivity creates, for the first time, the technological infrastructure capable of implementing exactly such a system. Current developments in central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, digital IDs linking biometric data to economic permissions, and the growing social credit systems pioneered in nations like China demonstrate how existing technology could rapidly enable the economic control system described in prophecy. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated these developments, normalizing digital tracking of movements, activities, and compliance as prerequisites for economic and social participation, creating precisely the conditions described in Revelation. The environmental aspects of biblical prophecy show similar unprecedented alignment with current conditions. Scripture describes end-time scenarios involving extreme weather patterns, agricultural disruptions, and ecological instability. Revelation mentions scorching heat, contaminated waters, and atmospheric conditions causing unusual physical symptoms. While natural disasters have occurred throughout history, the current global pattern of simultaneous environmental stresses affecting food security, water availability, and atmospheric conditions represents unprecedented alignment with these biblical descriptions. The convergence of prophetic signs extends far beyond geopolitical developments to include specific technological, societal, and spiritual conditions described in Scripture as characterizing the final generation. These detailed alignments create an unprecedented prophetic scenario that suggests we may indeed be witnessing the beginning of the final countdown. One of the most specific prophetic requirements involves the technological capacity for implementing global systems of monitoring and control. Revelation 13:16-17 describes how, under the final world system, no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark. Throughout most of history, such comprehensive economic tracking seemed practically impossible, requiring surveillance and economic control capabilities beyond anything previously achievable. Today, for the first time, the technological infrastructure for such a system exists not merely theoretically, but in practical implementation. Digital payment systems have already replaced physical currency transactions for most economic activity in many societies. Biometric authentication through facial recognition, fingerprints, or even implantable chips is rapidly becoming normalized. The combination of blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, and ubiquitous connectivity creates unprecedented capability for tracking and controlling economic participation based on compliance with specific requirements. What makes current technological development particularly significant from a prophetic perspective is not merely its existence, but its accelerating integration into comprehensive systems of social control. China's social credit system demonstrates how digital tracking can systematically reward or penalize specific behaviors and belief expressions through economic access restrictions. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this pattern globally, normalizing digital health verification as prerequisite for travel, employment, and public facility access in many regions. These developments create, for the first time in human history, the practical capability to implement exactly the kind of compliance-based economic permission system described in Revelation. Previous generations could only interpret such prophecies symbolically or partially, lacking the technological context to envision their literal fulfillment. Our generation faces the unprecedented situation of witnessing the technological infrastructure for literal fulfillment already deployed and expanding. The population conditions necessary for biblical end-time scenarios have also reached unprecedented fulfillment potential. Revelation describes catastrophic events affecting substantial portions of global population and ecosystems, with specific fractions mentioned. A third of mankind was killed, Revelation 9:18. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, Revelation 8:9. Throughout most of history, truly global impact at this scale seemed implausible given Earth's size and humanity's limited capabilities. Today, human technological development has created, for the first time, genuine capability for impacting global populations and ecosystems at precisely the scales described in prophecy. Nuclear arsenals could affect exactly the population percentages mentioned. Environmental systems have become sufficiently interconnected and vulnerable that disruption of key ecosystems could produce the specific mortality ratios described for marine and terrestrial life. Even conventional military technologies have reached destructive capacities, matching the prophetic descriptions previously considered hyperbolic. Beyond technological capabilities, global demographic patterns show remarkable alignment with prophetic descriptions of the final generation. Jesus characterized the end times as resembling the days of Noah, Matthew 24:37, a period Scripture describes as marked by extraordinary violence, moral corruption, and spiritual deception. The specific conditions mentioned in 2 Timothy 3:1-5 as characterizing the last days include unprecedented selfishness, greed, boastfulness, faithlessness, and spiritual form without substance. Current societal trends show remarkable alignment with these specific characteristics. Despite material prosperity in many regions, measures of social cohesion, mental health, and moral consensus have declined precipitously. Traditional family structures have experienced unprecedented disruption across diverse cultures simultaneously. Religious identification increasingly emphasizes external forms while declining in transformative spiritual impact. Precisely the pattern of having a form of godliness but denying its power that Paul identified as characterizing the final generation. The communication capabilities necessary for specific end times prophecies have also reached unprecedented fulfillment potential. Revelation 11:9-10 describes how, when the two witnesses are killed, for 3.5 days, some from every people, tribe, language, and nation will gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets had tormented those who live on the earth. Throughout most of history, such global real-time viewing of specific events seemed logistically impossible. Today, satellite technology, internet streaming, and smart devices create, for the first time, the practical capability for people worldwide to simultaneously witness specific events in real time, precisely as described in this prophecy. The pandemic-accelerated normalization of global live streaming and virtual presence creates exactly the conditions necessary for this prophecy's literal fulfillment. The religious conditions described as preceding Christ's return show similar, unprecedented alignment with current developments. Scripture indicates that the final generation would witness both widespread apostasy within professing Christianity and simultaneous global evangelistic reach. These seemingly contradictory conditions are precisely what we observe today. Institutional Christianity experiencing unprecedented decline in traditional strongholds while simultaneously reaching previously unreached people groups at accelerating rates. Jesus' prophecy that this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come, Matthew 24:14, has approached fulfillment at an extraordinary pace. Bible translations now exist for languages covering over 97% of the world's population. Digital platforms have enabled gospel presentation in previously inaccessible regions. For the first time in history, we approach the condition where essentially all people groups have received gospel witness, a specific prerequisite Jesus established for the end of the age. Perhaps most significantly, the prophetic timing indicators related to Israel have reached unprecedented alignment. Daniel 9:27 describes a final 7-year period culminating in Messiah's return, beginning with a peace agreement involving Israel that includes provisions for temple worship. For most of history, such a scenario seemed impossible. Jerusalem was under non-Jewish control, no temple existed, and Israel itself had no sovereignty to negotiate such agreements. Today, for the first time since biblical prophecies were written, all the necessary preconditions exist simultaneously. Israel controls Jerusalem, temple preparations, including vessels, priestly garments, and trained personnel, are complete, and peace negotiations involving precisely the territories and conditions mentioned in prophecy are actively underway. The Abraham Accords, beginning in 2020, established the diplomatic framework potentially, leading to the specific peace arrangement described in prophecy. The convergence of these developments, Israel's restoration, specific international alignments, technological capacity for global economic control, unprecedented moral conditions, and communication capabilities matching detailed prophetic requirements, creates a prophetic alignment unprecedented in comprehensiveness and precision. While previous generations might have observed partial fulfillments of individual prophecies, our generation witnesses the simultaneous alignment of multiple detailed requirements across diverse prophetic domains. The prophetic significance of current developments extends beyond individual alignments to include the unprecedented acceleration and convergence of signs across multiple domains simultaneously. This pattern of acceleration itself fulfills Jesus' description of end-times events as birth pains, Matthew 24:8, increasing in both frequency and intensity as the culmination approaches. One of the most remarkable aspects of this prophetic convergence involves the specific conditions Jesus described as characterizing the final generation. In Luke 21:25-26, he stated, "There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken." This description combines celestial phenomena, environmental disruption, and unprecedented collective anxiety, precisely the conditions we observe today. Astronomical research has documented increasing solar activity, near-Earth asteroid detection, and cosmic phenomena drawing scientific attention. Simultaneously, oceanic disruptions, from sea level changes to marine ecosystem collapse to increasing storm intensity, create exactly the roaring and tossing of the sea Jesus described. Perhaps most tellingly, surveys across diverse cultures document extraordinary levels of collective anxiety about global conditions, what Jesus characterized as people being apprehensive of what is coming on the world. This specific psychological condition transcends normal historical patterns of concern, with unprecedented percentages of populations expressing existential worry about humanity's future. The convergence of these precise conditions, celestial attention, oceanic disruption, and collective apprehension, creates remarkable alignment with Jesus' detailed prophecy. The technological capabilities necessary for fulfilling Revelation's descriptions of global events have not merely developed, but accelerated at extraordinary rates. Revelation 11:9-10 describes how people from every people, tribe, language, and nation would simultaneously witness specific events in Jerusalem and communicate with each other about them in real time. For most of history, such global real-time viewing and interaction seemed impossible. Today, not only does the technology exist for such global witnessing, but its adoption has accelerated exponentially. The COVID-19 pandemic dramatically expanded global reliance on virtual presence technologies, with bandwidth increases and platform adoption compressing what would have been decades of gradual change into months. This extraordinary acceleration creates the precise communications infrastructure necessary for fulfilling Revelation's descriptions of global real-time event witnessing. The spiritual dimension of current developments shows similar acceleration and convergence. Scripture indicates that the final generation would witness both widespread apostasy within professing Christianity and extraordinary spiritual hunger among those seeking truth. 2 Thessalonians 2:3 describes a falling away or apostasy preceding the end, while Joel 2:28 prophesies God pouring out his Spirit with resulting visions, dreams, and prophecies among diverse age groups and social categories. Current religious trends document exactly this dual pattern: unprecedented decline in institutional religious affiliation alongside extraordinary spiritual awakening movements, particularly in previously unreached regions. Traditional Christian denominations in Western nations report record membership declines and doctrinal confusion, while simultaneously the Church experiences its fastest global growth in history across Africa, Asia, and previously resistant cultures. This paradoxical combination, institutional decline alongside spiritual authenticity, precisely matches biblical descriptions of wheat and tares maturing together until harvest. Matthew 13:30. The acceleration of both trends simultaneously, rather than sequential development, suggests the approaching culmination of the age that Jesus described as the harvest when full separation occurs. The moral conditions Jesus identified as characterizing the final generation show similar convergence and acceleration. In Matthew 24:37, Jesus stated, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." Genesis describes Noah's generation as distinctly characterized by extraordinary violence and moral corruption, with every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Genesis 6:5. Current moral trends demonstrate precisely this pattern of accelerating societal degeneration. Despite technological advancement and material prosperity, measures of social cohesion, mental health, and basic moral consensus have declined at unprecedented rates across diverse cultures simultaneously. Traditional family structures have experienced disruption at accelerating pace. The glorification of violence and dehumanization in entertainment and social discourse has intensified dramatically. These developments align precisely with Paul's detailed description in 2 Timothy 3:1-5 of conditions in the last days. People becoming lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. The comprehensive manifestation of these specific characteristics, accelerating simultaneously across diverse cultures, creates extraordinary alignment with biblical descriptions of the final generation. Perhaps most significantly, the prophetic time frame established through Israel shows remarkable convergence with these accelerating developments. Scripture uses Israel as the primary chronological marker for end times events. Jesus established the fig tree, representing Israel, putting forth leaves as the signal that summer is near, right at the door. Matthew 24:32-33. He further stated that this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Matthew 24:34. If generation refers to the normal biblical lifespan of 70-80 years, Psalm 90:10, from Israel's rebirth in 1948, we approach the outer limit of this prophetic time frame. The convergence of this specific time frame with all the other accelerating prophetic signs creates extraordinary circumstantial evidence that we have indeed entered the final countdown period Jesus described. This acceleration pattern extends to developments surrounding Jerusalem specifically. Zechariah 12:2-3 prophesied that Jerusalem would become a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling, and an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. This description of Jerusalem becoming the epicenter of international controversy precisely matches current geopolitical reality, with Jerusalem's status generating more United Nations resolutions than any other issue and creating fractious division even among traditional allies. The rate of prophetic alignment indicates not merely development, but completion of necessary preconditions. The temple preparations provide remarkable example. Not only has Orthodox Judaism revived ancient temple practices through organizations like the Temple Institute, but they have now completed fabrication of all necessary temple elements, training of qualified priests, and architectural plans ready for immediate implementation. These preparations have accelerated dramatically in recent years, with final elements being completed precisely as other prophetic developments converge. The prophetic implications of current developments extend beyond individual signs to include specific patterns of prophetic fulfillment that suggest divine orchestration rather than mere coincidence. These patterns reveal a precision and comprehensiveness that points toward deliberate unfolding of a predetermined divine timeline. One of the most significant prophetic patterns involves the precise sequence of developments surrounding Israel. Scripture indicates specific stages in Israel's prophetic restoration. First, a physical regathering in unbelief, Ezekiel 37:1-8. The dry bones assembled but still without breath, followed by spiritual renewal, Ezekiel 37:9-14, breath entering the bodies, ultimately culminating in recognition of Messiah, Zechariah 12:10, they will look on me, the one they have pierced, and mourn. Current developments follow exactly this prophetic sequence. Israel has been physically re-established and has achieved remarkable prosperity and military strength, precisely the first stage prophesied. Simultaneously, we witness unprecedented spiritual stirrings within Jewish communities worldwide, with messianic Jewish movements growing at extraordinary rates and traditional Judaism experiencing renewal movements focusing on Messiah-related temple preparations. These developments suggest we have entered the transition between the first and second prophetic stages Ezekiel described. The specific nature of current temple preparations deserves particular attention through a prophetic lens. Daniel 9:27 describes how, in the final 7-year period before Messiah's return, a significant figure will confirm a covenant with many for 1:7, and then halfway through this period will put an end to sacrifice and offering. This prophecy requires functioning temple worship during this final 7-year period, something that seemed impossible throughout most of the past 2 millennia when no temple existed and Jerusalem remained under non-Jewish control. Today, not only does Israel control the Temple Mount area, but Orthodox Jewish organizations have completed preparation of every element necessary for immediate temple worship resumption. Fabricated vessels according to biblical specifications, trained priests from verified Levitical lineage, produced priestly garments using biblical methods, and even bred the rare red heifer required for purification rituals. These preparations have not merely progressed but reached completion stage precisely as other prophetic developments converge. The timing pattern of these developments shows remarkable mathematical precision. Israel's restoration occurred exactly 2,520 years, 7 times 360, a significant prophetic time frame established in Daniel from the beginning of the Babylonian captivity. Jerusalem's return to Jewish control in 1967 happened exactly 2,300 years from Alexander the Great's rise, matching the precise time frame given in Daniel 8:14. These precise chronological alignments suggest divine orchestration of the prophetic calendar rather than random historical developments. The geopolitical alignments necessary for Ezekiel 38:39's description of a final coalition attacking Israel have emerged with remarkable suddenness and precision. For decades, prophecy teachers identified Russia and Iran as likely fulfilling the roles of Gog from the land of Magog and Persia in this prophecy, but noted that these nations had limited historical cooperation and sometimes conflicting interests. The rapid transformation of Russia-Iran relations into a full strategic alliance, complete with military coordination, technology transfers, and aligned regional objectives, has occurred with extraordinary speed precisely as other prophetic elements converge. This alliance has not merely formed, but has established military presence directly on Israel's borders through involvement in Syria, creating geographic positioning matching Ezekiel's description of forces coming against Israel from the north. The specific nations mentioned in this prophetic coalition, including Libya, Sudan, and Turkey, have simultaneously realigned their relationships with Russia and Iran in precise fulfillment of the prophesied alliance configuration. The technological developments necessary for implementing the Mark of the Beast system described in Revelation 13 show similar divine timing. Throughout most of history, the concept of controlling all buying and selling worldwide seemed logistically impossible. The necessary technologies, digital currencies, biometric identification, global connectivity, and AI surveillance have developed not gradually, but in explosive convergence, with capabilities advancing more in the past decade than in all previous human history. What makes this technological convergence particularly significant from a prophetic perspective is its apparent divine timing. These capabilities have reached implementation stage precisely as other prophetic elements converge, creating the exact conditions necessary for fulfilling Revelation's descriptions, exactly as the prophetic time frame established through Israel approaches its conclusion. The monetary systems described in end times prophecy show similar, precisely timed development. Revelation 13 describes economic controls requiring specific technical capabilities, tracking all transactions, linking economic permissions to compliance with particular requirements, and implementing this system globally. For most of history, such capabilities exceeded human technological reach. Today, not only do these capabilities exist, but they have reached implementation stage through central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, digital ID initiatives, and cashless transaction systems. The timing of these monetary developments shows remarkable divine orchestration. Traditional financial systems functioned effectively for centuries, yet suddenly face comprehensive transformation precisely as other prophetic elements reach fulfillment stage. The 2008 financial crisis created conditions justifying fundamental monetary system restructuring, with blockchain technology simultaneously emerging to enable the precise control mechanisms described in prophecy. This convergence of financial system vulnerability and technological capability, precisely when prophetic timeframes indicate approaching culmination, suggests divine timing rather than coincidence. The communication capabilities necessary for specific end times events show similar divine orchestration in their development timing. Revelation describes multiple scenarios requiring global real-time communication, the two witnesses' ministry being observed worldwide, the image of the beast speaking to all people, and economic participation requiring global authentication infrastructure. These capabilities have not merely developed, but reached worldwide implementation precisely as other prophetic elements converge. The acceleration of these communication capabilities through the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrates remarkable prophetic timing. Remote interaction technologies that might have required decades for global adoption were implemented worldwide in months, creating the exact global infrastructure necessary for fulfilling specific end times prophecies. This extraordinary acceleration occurred precisely as prophetic timeframes indicated approaching culmination, suggesting divine orchestration of technological development pacing. Perhaps most significantly, the spiritual conditions described as characterizing the final generation have manifested with remarkable precision and timing. Jesus warned that the final generation would witness unprecedented spiritual deception, with false messiahs and false prophets performing great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Matthew 24:24. This description suggests not obvious religious counterfeits, but sophisticated spiritual deception, capable of confusing even sincere believers. Current spiritual trends show precisely this pattern, with unprecedented convergence between traditional religious forms and contradictory belief systems. Interfaith movements promoting unity through doctrinal compromise, spirituality emphasizing subjective experience over propositional truth, and religious leadership endorsing positions contradicting historical biblical interpretation have all accelerated dramatically. These developments create exactly the conditions of sophisticated spiritual confusion Jesus described as characterizing the final generation. The timing of these spiritual developments shows apparent divine orchestration. Religious boundaries maintained for centuries have experienced unprecedented dissolution precisely as technological capabilities for implementing the mark of the beast system have reached maturity, and Israel's prophetic restoration has achieved advanced stages. This synchronized convergence across spiritual, technological, and geopolitical domains suggests deliberate, divine timing rather than random historical evolution. As we synthesize the evidence regarding prophetic convergence and acceleration, we must consider the implications for believers seeking to navigate these momentous times with wisdom and faithfulness. The unprecedented alignment of specific biblical signs suggests we may indeed have entered the final countdown period Jesus described, a recognition carrying profound spiritual and practical significance. The biblical narrative consistently emphasizes that prophetic understanding serves not to satisfy curiosity, but to prepare God's people spiritually and practically for approaching developments. In 1 Peter 4:7, we read, "The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of sober mind so that you may pray." This instruction connects prophetic awareness directly to spiritual readiness, recognizing approaching fulfillment should deepen prayer, enhance alertness, and promote clarity rather than triggering panic or escapism. For believers seeking to respond appropriately to these converging signs, several biblical principles provide essential guidance. First, maintain balanced discernment that recognizes patterns without presuming complete understanding. Jesus warned against both ignorance of prophetic signs and excessive specificity about timing. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Matthew 24:36. This balanced approach acknowledges the reality of approaching fulfillment while maintaining humility about precise details or timetables. The remarkable convergence of prophetic signs suggests we have entered the general time frame Jesus described, while the specific day or hour remains appropriately uncertain. This balanced understanding promotes watchfulness without the presumption of setting exact dates, a pattern that honors both the clarity and the mystery within biblical prophecy. Second, recognize that prophetic awareness should intensify spiritual commitment rather than diminish it. Jesus' instructions regarding end times awareness consistently emphasize increased faithfulness. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Matthew 24:44-46. This perspective transforms prophetic awareness from mere intellectual interest to spiritual motivation. The convergence of signs indicating approaching fulfillment should inspire deeper commitment to spiritual disciplines, more consistent obedience to biblical teaching, and more intentional investment in eternal priorities. Rather than creating speculative distraction, authentic prophetic understanding produces practical spiritual focus. Third, maintain community perspective amid approaching developments. Scripture consistently emphasizes the importance of believers supporting one another as prophetic fulfillment approaches. Hebrews 10:24-25 instructs, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." This passage directly connects increasing prophetic awareness with strengthened community commitment. This communal emphasis contradicts the isolationist tendency sometimes associated with end times preparation. Biblical wisdom suggests that approaching prophetic fulfillment should deepen believers' interconnection rather than promoting separation. The accelerating challenges Jesus described require supportive spiritual community rather than individualistic survival mentality. Fourth, preserve evangelistic focus as the culmination approaches. Jesus established a direct connection between global evangelization and end times fulfillment. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Matthew 24:14. This passage suggests that recognizing approaching prophetic fulfillment should intensify rather than diminish evangelistic commitment. The convergence of signs indicating the approaching end should create urgency about reaching those who remain spiritually unprepared. Jesus' prophetic teaching consistently emphasizes the eternal consequences awaiting those unprepared for his return, a reality that should motivate compassionate evangelistic effort rather than smug satisfaction among those recognizing the signs. Fifth, maintain practical wisdom alongside spiritual readiness. Jesus' parable of the 10 virgins, Matthew 25:1-13, emphasizes the importance of practical preparation for his return. The wise virgins maintained adequate oil supplies while awaiting the bridegroom, representing both spiritual readiness and practical provision for delayed fulfillment. This balanced approach avoids both the spiritual negligence of the presumptuous and the practical negligence of the merely theoretical. For contemporary believers noting prophetic convergence, this principle suggests prudent preparation for challenging conditions while maintaining ultimate trust in God's provision and protection. Jesus' warnings about unprecedented tribulation preceding his return, Matthew 24:21, indicate wisdom in practical readiness for potentially difficult circumstances while avoiding fearful stockpiling or panic-driven decisions. The specific question, has the final countdown begun, admits no absolute answer this side of fulfillment. Scripture maintains deliberate tension between clear prophetic signals and the mystery of exact timing. However, the unprecedented convergence of specific biblical prerequisites, Israel's restoration, Jerusalem's status, technological capabilities matching detailed prophetic requirements, and precise geopolitical alignments, creates compelling, circumstantial evidence that we have indeed entered the general timeframe Jesus described as the final generation. For those persuaded by this evidence, several practical responses merit consideration. Deepen spiritual foundations through increased biblical literacy, prayer discipline, and authentic community. Jesus warned that the final period before his return would include unprecedented spiritual deception capable of misleading even sincere believers, Matthew 24:24. The primary protection against such deception involves not prophetic speculation, but deep-rootedness in Scripture, spiritual disciplines, and authentic community that provides accountability and discernment. Evaluate life priorities and investments in light of eternal perspective. Jesus repeatedly emphasized the eternal consequences of choices made during the final period before his return. The parable of the talents, Matthew 25:14-30, the sheep and goats judgment, Matthew 25:31-46, and the rich fool, Luke 12:16-21, all highlight how approaching accountability should reshape resource allocation, relational investments, and life purpose. Prophetic awareness should produce practical realignment with eternal rather than temporary values. Develop appropriate resilience for potentially challenging conditions. Jesus' warnings about the period preceding his return consistently mention practical challenges, from persecution to economic instability to social upheaval. Wisdom suggests developing reasonable preparation without fearful extremism, sustainable approaches to essential needs, supportive community connections, adaptable skill sets, and simplified lifestyles less dependent on vulnerable systems. Maintain hope as the foundation for both understanding and action. Biblical prophecy ultimately focuses not on tribulation, but on triumphant fulfillment of God's redemptive purposes. Even Revelation's most challenging passages conclude with the glorious vision of New Jerusalem and creation's restoration. This hope-centered perspective transforms prophetic awareness from fearful apprehension to confident anticipation, enabling steady faithfulness regardless of intervening challenges. Perhaps most importantly, preserve love as the central motivation for all responses to prophetic awareness. In 1 Corinthians 13:2, Paul writes that, "If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, but do not have love, I am nothing." This passage establishes that even perfect prophetic understanding without love lacks spiritual value. Authentic response to prophetic convergence manifests primarily through increased love for God and others, rather than merely accurate timeline recognition. The biblical narrative consistently portrays those who recognize prophetic fulfillment in their lifetime, from Simeon and Anna, who identified the infant Jesus as the promised Messiah, to the disciples who recognized his resurrection as fulfilling Scripture, as responding with worship, witness, and renewed commitment rather than merely intellectual satisfaction. This pattern suggests that if indeed the final countdown has begun, the appropriate response involves deepened devotion to the returning king rather than mere validation of prophetic speculation. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be the first to receive our insights on prophetic developments. Drop a comment below. Do you see evidence that the final countdown has begun? How are you responding spiritually and practically to the convergence of end times signs? Your perspective enriches this vital conversation about faith in these prophetically significant times. When prophecy becomes headline news, the wise neither panic nor ignore, but prepare with faithful hearts and steady hands, knowing that the same passages that warn of unprecedented challenges also promise the triumphant return of the King.